Chosen one, you've spoken your truth, and now the very people who thought they could bury you are spiraling. What they once considered jokes, what they laughed off as insignificant, is no longer funny to them. The manipulation, the mockery, the laughter, they thought they had it all under control, but now it's all backfiring. Every word you spoke, every truth you revealed, is unraveling the illusion they so carefully constructed. The light you carry, the clarity in your voice, is shaking everything they built on lies. You didn't just speak for yourself, you spoke for everyone they tried to silence, everyone they tried to oppress. And now, your words are echoing in their minds, their lives, and their deepest fears. This is the power of truth, and you've just unleashed it. Your discernment has given you a vision beyond the surface, a wisdom that cuts through manipulation and deception. Let the truth unfold, because the world is watching, and it's about to witness the unraveling of what once seemed unbreakable. At first, they thought they had you exactly where they wanted you, dismissed, belittled, and painted as the emotional one, the one too sensitive, too much to handle. They underestimated the power of your truth, but in their eyes, it was the perfect strategy: mockery, laughter, and manipulation. They built an entire narrative around you, a narrative that painted you as the problem, as someone who could easily be dismissed. They thought that if they mocked you enough, if they got others to join in the ridicule, your voice would fade into the background. They laughed to drown out your truth, to make you feel small, to make you question your worth. But what they didn't realize is that truth doesn't need validation. It doesn't need approval from anyone. Truth is rooted in something far deeper than opinions or perspectives. It's rooted in the essence of what is real, what is undeniable. And though they tried to laugh it off, your words were planting seeds, quietly taking root in places no one could see. In the beginning, they thought it was just noise. They thought you were being dramatic, overreacting, just another person too emotional for the real world. They never imagined that your words, spoken with such clarity and precision, would chip away at the walls they'd built. They didn't see it coming. Your truth wasn't just words, it was a force, a catalyst for change. As they mocked, they failed to notice that each laugh, each dismissive gesture, was only fueling the power of your truth. You weren't speaking out of emotion, you were speaking from clarity, from an understanding that couldn't be denied. The turning point came when the laughter started to fade, when the smirks on their faces began to waver. The truth you spoke had started to eat away at the illusion they'd so carefully constructed. They were no longer in control, and they knew it. What once seemed like an easy victory was slipping through their fingers. Every day, the power of your words grew louder, louder than any laugh they could muster, louder than any ridicule they could throw your way. It was no longer just about the words. It was about the undeniable shift in energy, the shift in perception. The people who once joined in their laughter were now questioning everything they thought they knew. The tide was turning, and they could feel it. The truth had found its place in the world, and it was growing stronger with each passing moment. Their manipulation was no longer effective. Your truth, spoken with precision, had opened a door that they couldn't close. And the more they tried to deny it, the more their world began to unravel. They were spiraling because deep down, they knew everything you had said was true. They thought they could control the narrative, but now the truth was speaking for itself. The truth is a seed that doesn't need validation. It is quietly planted, often unnoticed, and once it takes root, it starts to grow in ways that cannot be stopped. It doesn't need the approval of the people around it, and it doesn't require anyone's permission to take hold of the world. It simply is. The power of truth lies in its ability to endure, to persist, and to create a foundation of reality that can no longer be shaken once it finds its place. The truth doesn't scream for attention. It speaks softly, steadily, and with a force that only grows with time. What they didn't realize when they dismissed you and laughed at your truth was that their actions were watering this seed. Every dismissal, every act of mockery was feeding the truth you spoke and allowing it to grow stronger. They thought their laughter would kill it, but it only nurtured it. They didn't know that when they laughed, they were unknowingly helping the truth root deeper into their minds and hearts. They never saw it coming. How could they? They had no concept of the power that your words carried. They believed their performance, their clever act of mockery, would silence you, make you question yourself, and make the truth seem like a fantasy, an exaggeration. They assumed that if they just made enough noise, if they played their part convincingly, you would shrink back into the silence they had chosen for you. They believed that if enough people laughed at you, your voice would fade into the background, drowned by their collective ridicule. What they didn't understand was that your truth was a force of nature, one that had been waiting for the perfect moment to rise. And that moment came when they underestimated its power. Their fear started to rise as the truth you spoke began to manifest in the real world. Their manipulation, their lies, their performance, they were all starting to unravel. They began to realize that every word you spoke had come with a cost, and that cost was their own reality. The consequences they had long avoided were now coming for them. They had lived their lives spinning lies, creating illusions, and manipulating people into believing their narrative. But now, with your truth out in the open, that narrative was crashing down. It was no longer just about you being right. It was about everything you said beginning to unfold exactly as you had predicted. The fears they had pushed aside for so long were now standing at their door. Their lies were crumbling under the weight of your accuracy, and they had nowhere to run. Their spiraling began when they couldn't escape the reality of what you had exposed. It wasn't just that they were wrong, it was that they had been so certain of their control over you, and now that control was slipping away. Their performance, their act, was losing its power. The people who once believed in them were now starting to question everything. They were being exposed, not because you wanted to tear them down, but because the truth simply wouldn't stay hidden. They thought they could bury it, laugh it off, and manipulate the narrative, but the seed of truth you planted had grown into something undeniable, and now it was impossible for them to ignore. What they didn't anticipate was that the truth you spoke wasn't just about their behavior. It wasn't just about calling out their actions or exposing their lies. It went much deeper than that. You didn't simply expose them as individuals. You called out the spirit behind their behavior. You saw through the surface, through the drama and the masks they wore, and you identified what had been driving them all along. The spirit of manipulation, the energy of control, the darkness that had been fueling their every move. It was all laid bare. And once you named it, it could no longer hide. You didn't just confront them on a personal level, you confronted the very energy that had been empowering their deception. The power of discernment you carried allowed you to see what others couldn't. While they operated in the shadows, manipulating, controlling, and deceiving, you saw through it all. You understood the depth of their actions, the darkness they had partnered with. You saw it not as isolated incidents or petty conflicts, but as a pattern, a strategy designed to maintain control. You didn't react emotionally, even when they tried to provoke you. You responded with clarity, with discernment, and with truth. And that was what shook them to their core. You didn't just call out their actions, you called out the spiritual force behind those actions. By identifying the spirit behind their behavior, you changed the entire dynamic of the situation. What had once been personal conflict, what had once seemed like a petty dispute, suddenly became something much greater. You exposed the deeper, darker force at play, and that forced everyone to see the situation for what it truly was. You had stripped away the layers of manipulation, and in doing so, you had revealed the truth. They had been using their charm, their wit, their calculated moves to maintain an illusion, but you saw through it all. And now, they couldn't escape it. What had once been hidden was now in the light, and there was no way to put it back in the shadows. This was the real shift, the moment when the battle moved beyond the personal. It wasn't just about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about spiritual warfare. The manipulation they had used, the lies they had spread, the tactics they had employed, they were no longer just their personal choices. They had partnered with a spirit of control and deception, and by calling it out, you had broken its power. The battle had moved from the physical realm to the spiritual realm, and in that space, the stakes were much higher. You had disrupted the agreement they had made with darkness, and now the consequences were coming for them. The dynamic had shifted. They were no longer in control, and now they were facing the results of their actions in a way they had never anticipated. When you spoke, you didn't just react emotionally. You didn't allow their manipulation to trigger a chaotic response. Instead, you called out the exact tactics they were using with surgical precision. You didn't throw accusations around or engage in petty drama. You spoke from a place of clarity, from a place of truth, and that's what made your words so powerful. You called them out, not with anger, but with precision. You knew exactly what they were doing, how they were doing it, and why they were doing it. And when you spoke, you didn't leave room for doubt. There was no ambiguity in your words. You didn't need to scream or make a scene. Your truth stood firm, unshakable, and undeniable. This is what made their illusion crumble. Their manipulation had always been built on deception, on twisting the truth, on making people doubt their own perceptions. But when you spoke, you didn't just expose them for what they were doing. You exposed the method behind their madness. You revealed how they had been manipulating the situation, how they had been playing the game, and how they had been controlling the narrative. And in doing so, you took away their power. They could no longer manipulate the people around them because the truth had been spoken, and it had been spoken with such clarity that it left no room for their lies to thrive. What was once a personal conflict became a matter of spiritual warfare. It wasn't just about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about exposing the darkness that had been manipulating everything from the start. You didn't just call them out on their actions, you named the spirit behind it. And that is what terrified them. They thought they could keep playing their game, but once you exposed the truth, their power evaporated. The walls they had built to protect their deception started to crumble, and they were left standing, exposed, with nothing to hide behind. The battle, once hidden behind closed doors, was now in the open, and in that light, the truth couldn't be denied. Every move they made, every attempt to manipulate the situation, only made it clearer that they had been lying all along. And what was even more dangerous for them was that they couldn't deny the truth. They couldn't twist it, bend it, or manipulate it to fit their narrative. Your words were like a spotlight, illuminating everything they had tried to keep hidden, and now they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. Their manipulation had been powerful when it was hidden, when no one could see it for what it truly was. But now, with the truth exposed, the game had changed. They had lost. As the truth you spoke began to spread, it didn't just affect those directly involved. It rippled out, touching everyone who had been caught in the web of manipulation. The consequences were inevitable. The lies, once carefully constructed and maintained, were now unraveling. What was once hidden beneath layers of deception was now out in the open for all to see. The people who had once been complicit in the illusion, who had either willingly or unknowingly supported the manipulator, started to realize the extent of what had been happening. The truth had become a mirror, reflecting the reality of their actions and choices, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable reality that they had been misled. People who had once stood by their side began to question everything. The facade, which had been so convincing, now seemed fragile and cracked. What had once been seen as reliable or trustworthy was now being scrutinized under the harsh light of truth. Relationships that were built on deceit began to fracture. Allies became distant. Friends became strangers. Those who had laughed with them, dismissed you, and participated in the mockery now found themselves grappling with their own conscience. They couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. The manipulator's carefully crafted narrative had been shattered, and now they were left exposed, vulnerable, and struggling to keep the illusion intact. The panic began when they realized they couldn't control the story anymore. The walls they had built, the lies they had told, the people they had manipulated, everything was collapsing around them. The carefully constructed image they had spent so long perfecting was now falling apart. People were waking up. The truths you revealed were no longer confined to your own words. They had spread like wildfire, and now the audience, those who had once been in the dark, were beginning to see clearly, and that terrified them. They could no longer hide behind their charisma, their charm, or their well-practiced lies. The truth had taken on a life of its own, and it was now impossible to deny. The fallout was not just emotional, it was spiritual. Their carefully constructed world, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling under the weight of the truth. What once seemed like invulnerability now appeared fragile and weak. The foundation of their power had always been built on deception, and now it was crumbling into dust, and they couldn't stop it. The spiral had begun, and there was no going back. As the truth continued to unfold, they were left scrambling, trying to piece together a story that had already been exposed for what it truly was. Their carefully constructed image, their web of manipulation, was now visible to everyone, and there was no hiding from it. The truth came at the perfect time. It wasn't just a random moment, it was divine timing, carefully orchestrated for maximum impact. You didn't speak out of desperation or anger, you spoke from a place of strength, clarity, and alignment with your purpose. You were prepared, you had healed, you had grown, and when the moment came, your words were powerful, because they were rooted in truth, not emotion. You didn't need to scream or shout, you didn't need to make a spectacle. You spoke calmly, confidently, and with authority. And that's what made your truth so powerful. It wasn't just about what you said, it was about how you said it, the confidence and the peace behind your words. Your truth wasn't just an accusation, it was a statement of fact, a declaration of reality, and that reality carried weight. The lies that had been spun for so long could no longer stand up to the power of your truth. Your words were like a sword cutting through the deception, exposing the lies that had been cloaked in charm and manipulation. They had built their narrative around you, tried to suppress your voice, and laughed at your truth. But now, they couldn't do that anymore. Your words had too much weight. The lies could no longer hold up in the face of the undeniable truth you spoke. And with that truth came a profound shift in power. They had relied on their ability to manipulate the narrative, to control the story. But now, the story had changed. You were the one telling it, and your version of events was undeniable. The truth had shifted the power dynamic. It had exposed their weakness and their lies, and now they were left defenseless. They couldn't manipulate the narrative anymore. The story had already been told, and it was out in the open for all to see. This was the moment they feared the most, the moment when the truth was no longer theirs to control. The consequences they had been avoiding for so long were now catching up with them, and there was nowhere left to hide. Their manipulation tactics, which had once been so effective, were now ineffective. People could see them for what they truly were. The truth had exposed everything, and now their fear was palpable. They could no longer deceive anyone. The walls they had built to protect their lies were crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The panic was real, and it was only just beginning. But what they didn't realize was that the truth you spoke didn't just expose one person, it exposed an entire system, a system of manipulation, deception, and control that had been in place for far too long. What you had done wasn't just call out one individual. You had shed light on the entire infrastructure of deceit that had been protecting them. You had exposed the tactics, the strategies, and the methods they had used to manipulate and control the narrative. And in doing so, you had exposed the system that allowed it to thrive. You didn't just call out their behavior, you identified the entire network of lies that had been holding everything together. You showed the world how their manipulation worked, how they used charm, gaslighting, and false narratives to keep everyone in line. And when you exposed that system, everything changed. It wasn't just about one person anymore. It was about the entire framework of control that had been built to protect them. And now, that framework was shattered. What followed was a collective awakening. People who had been manipulated, who had been caught in the same web of lies, suddenly saw the truth for what it was. The fog had been lifted, and they were able to recognize the patterns of behavior they had been conditioned to accept. The people who had once been complicit in the system were now realizing what had been happening. They could see how they had been deceived, how they had allowed the manipulation to continue unchecked. And with that realization came a powerful shift. Your actions sparked a domino effect. The truth you spoke empowered others to break their silence, to speak up about their own experiences, and to share what they had been through. The system of manipulation that had once been so effective was now exposed for what it was, and people were starting to wake up. The truth you spoke had become a rallying cry, a call to others who had been silenced to step forward and share their stories. It wasn't just about you anymore. It was about the collective power of truth-telling, of breaking the silence that had been maintained for so long. As more and more people began to speak their truth, the system of manipulation began to crumble. The web of lies that had held everything together was falling apart, piece by piece. The very foundation of their power was built on silence and deception, and once that silence was broken, the entire system began to collapse. The ripple effect of your truth was unstoppable. What started with you calling out one person had now become a movement, a collective awakening that was shaking the very foundations of the lies that had been built. People who had once been afraid to speak out, afraid to challenge the status quo, were now finding their voices. They were empowered by the truth you spoke, by the clarity you brought, and by the authority you carried. The domino effect had begun, and it was spreading far beyond what they had anticipated. They thought they could silence you. They thought they could bury the truth. But now, the truth was speaking louder than ever, and it was empowering others to speak up as well. The system they had relied on to keep everyone in line was now crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. What they never expected was that your silence would not be their greatest weapon. It would be their greatest mistake. They thought that if they could keep you quiet, if they could suppress your voice and keep you in the shadows, they would remain in control. They believed that their manipulation, their lies, and their mocking laughter could bury your truth before it had a chance to grow. But they underestimated the power of your silence. What they didn't realize was that silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation, and when you finally spoke, you spoke with a force they could never have anticipated. They thought your silence would make you weak, but instead it made your truth more powerful. In that silence you gathered strength, you honed your clarity, and when the time came, your words hit like a storm. They never expected that the very thing they tried to use to break you would become the very thing that would expose them for who they really were. They never imagined that you would rise from the ashes of their lies, stronger and clearer than ever before. Their arrogance blinded them to the fact that silence was not the end. It was the beginning. And now, their manipulation, their lies, their attempts to bury you were no longer holding any power. As the fallout from their lies begins to unfold, they are forced to face the consequences of their actions. They can no longer hide behind their carefully constructed image. The truth you spoke has exposed them to everyone, and now they have to deal with the damage they've caused. The facade they spent so long building is now crumbling, piece by piece. What was once a carefully crafted narrative of victimhood and righteousness is now exposed for what it truly is: manipulation, control, and deceit. They thought they could maintain the illusion. They thought they could control the narrative. But your truth has shattered it all. The power they once held is slipping through their fingers, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Now, in their final panic, they are scrambling to salvage whatever they can. But the harder they try to fix the mess they've made, the more they sink into the quicksand of their own lies. Their attempts to rewrite the story, to manipulate the narrative back in their favor, are falling apart. Your truth stands unshaken, stronger than ever. Every attempt to distort the facts only strengthens the reality of what you've exposed. Their panic is palpable. They know they've lost control. They thought they could bury the truth, but now it's out in the open, and it's not going anywhere. The game they played is over. The rules have changed, and now they're facing the consequences of everything they tried to hide. You, chosen one, have evolved. What they never anticipated was your transformation from the silenced one to the empowered truth teller. You didn't just survive their attacks, You became stronger because of them. You stood in your truth, unshaken and unwavering, and in doing so, you found your power. Where once you were the target, the victim of their manipulation, now you are the one leading the charge, the one standing firm in your clarity. You have walked through the fire they set for you, and instead of being burned, you've come out refined, stronger, and more determined than ever before. The person they tried to silence, the one they thought they could break, is now standing tall, holding their truth with unwavering confidence. You are no longer the person hiding in the shadows, afraid of what they might do next. You have become a force of nature. Your truth is your weapon, your shield, and your strength. With each passing day, you step more fully into your power. You don't need anyone's approval. You don't need to justify yourself to anyone. Your words now carry weight. Your presence is undeniable. You are a credible narrator, someone who speaks with authority, clarity, and purpose. And because of that, people listen. What they never expected was how you would thrive. They thought they had won. They thought they had manipulated you into silence, into submission. But instead, you've turned their attempts at destruction into the very fuel for your rise. You've taken what was meant to break you and used it to build yourself into someone unshakable. You've turned your pain into power, your silence into strength, and your truth into an unstoppable force. You've not only survived, you've thrived in a way they never saw coming. From being the target of their manipulation to becoming the one who exposes the system of deceit, you have evolved in ways that they couldn't have imagined. You didn't just outlast them, you outgrew them. You didn't stay small, hidden, or weak. You stood up, stood firm, and stood in your truth. And in doing so, you've created a new reality, one where your voice is heard, your presence is respected, and your truth is undeniable. As you stand in the power of your truth, reflect on the journey you've traveled. From the silenced, misunderstood person they tried to bury, you have risen into the one who tells the truth, the one who speaks with authority, the one who exposes the lies that once held you captive. The person they tried to break is now the one revealing everything, and your truth has set you free. This is a reminder for all who feel trapped, who feel silenced, who feel like their voice doesn't matter. Your truth matters. It is your power, your weapon, and your freedom. Do not let anyone or anything suppress it. Stand in your truth and watch how it transforms not only your life, but the lives of those around you. When you speak with clarity, when you speak from a place of alignment, when you speak from the strength of your own experience, there is nothing that can stop you. The truth has a way of cutting through the noise and exposing the lies. And once the truth is exposed, there is no going back. To all the chosen ones out there, know this: you are not alone. You are not meant to be silenced. You are meant to stand tall, speak your truth, and watch as the world around you transforms. Your voice is powerful. Your truth is powerful. And now, it's your time to shine. So, embrace your truth, walk in your power, and let the world see the unstoppable force you've become. Your truth is the key to your liberation, and once you stand in it, nothing can ever hold you back.